Welcome to Insider Focus, and today we're going to talk all things Tottenham. After what has been, well, a hectic week, I think it's fair to say. I'm joined by the brilliant Ricky Sacks from The Last Word. Ricky, talk to me. How are you feeling as a Tottenham fan? Bit overwhelmed, bit confused, bit dazed?
Yeah, another crazy week in the life of Tottenham Hotspur as the soap opera and drama rolls on. I think as fans, we're always intrigued to see what comes next, and with Tottenham, we're always left to keep on guessing. So, in a bit of a obviously situation at the moment with regards to Antonio, where it looks very likely that he's going to depart the football club, and I think many are just asking what comes next, and how the club moves forward once again with another manager under this board, and really what is going to change. There's a lot to probably get into, and a lot to try and understand what is happening in relation to the football club.
Yeah, well, obviously they're discussing compensation, how they can get Conte out. If they can get Conte out, I mean, obviously he's not got long left of his deal, and Spurs will be looking to not pay out anything absolutely massive at this point. It wouldn't quite be the £24 million that Chelsea paid out. I think that needs to be made clear because he's not got as long left in his deal. But we do know from Antonio Conte's history that when there's money due, Ricky, he makes sure that he gets his money. And after the incredible press conference, there was no doubt that he wasn't going to last long, and we don't think he was going to sign anyway, Ricky, at the end of the season. So that's something that's waiting to happen. How do you feel about what he said? Quickly, just on it. I know this press conference has been gone over and over again, but as a Spurs fan, was he right in what he said?
I think he had very, very valid points. I think many will probably ask, was it the right time to have done it? I mean, for me personally, I think Antonio was always, at some point before the end of his tenure, going to do a press conference like that. I think he personally maybe underestimated just how much of a storm that was going to cause by the words he mentioned, hence why he's tried to then re-clarify the comments of the board to insinuate that it wasn't being targeted to them, although you can't get away from the fact when you mentioned the fact of the owner and 20 years without a highly prestigious trophy, an FA Cup, Champions League, Premier League. It's difficult to really see a way back for him. And I think the nature of the interview to call all 11 players selfish, it's very, very hard to see a way in which a group of players would still want to play for the manager, given that a number of those players, I mean, Fraser Fletcher, I thought had a really, really good game against the opposition in Southampton, his former club, despite conceding 3. He made some really important saves. Pedro Porro, wouldn't say I'd call him selfish. He's a guy that scored his first goal for the football club. I thought he played okay. Listen, we weren't playing as an 11, that's for sure. I think that's probably what comes down to more of the tactical way they're being set up and the stubbornness of that system. So, in essence, as a whole, I do find a situation now where it's untenable. And I think that's why we're seeing a situation where Antonio is likely to leave the club in the coming next few days.
Well, there's some rumours that have come to us that perhaps they were discussing summer targets and a couple of names had come up and those names were rejected and Spurs weren't really willing to splash the cash, which I suppose is one of the criticisms that he's had before of the board. So maybe it was the straw that broke the camel's back that led him to doing what he did in the press conference. It's also him trying to get out, right? That's him trying to go, do you know what? It's time for me to leave. And you're right, Conte is a man that I think he did know, Ricky, exactly the impact that press conference would have. I think he was well aware of what he was doing. And it was his trying to get out the door. Into Milan, obviously, with Inzaghi, aren't quite happy with that situation. Have already signposted Antonio Conte for a potential move for him in the summer. So he's already got options lined up. Have you got the best man in charge at the moment, though, for getting you into the top 4? Because to get that Spurs side into the Champions League at last season and then into the knockout stages, I was at the AC Milan game, funnily enough, in your incredible stadium, and it was poor. I think it's fair to say it was slow and lethargic. But is Conte the best man for the job? Should he be given more backing?
I think Antonio Conte, in a setup in which he's being supported by his owners to the full capacity, is the right man for the football club. I don't think Antonio Conte is the right man under this current ownership. And that is me just being honest as to where I see things. I think it is tricky. I think when they appointed Antonio, they appointed again in another win now manager calibre, the same as Jose, that was going to come in and appease the supporters. But what, in fact, they've asked Conte to do is come in and actually be part of a project, which I'm not sure that's what ideally he would want. I feel like with Tottenham, what they tend to do is they get the manager and then they decide what they're looking to do. But it should be the other way around, where you actually have a blueprint of what you're looking for in terms of it being a project or a win-now manager, and then you identify the manager you want. So everything seems
Sorry
a
to
little
jump
bit...
in there on you, Ricky. Sorry to jump in on you there. I think that point's valid, right? Because it's been a project at Tottenham for 20 years. So either they have to do a project and do like a Chelsea where you're having the bad results and you're committed to seeing it through, or you have to go, do you know what? We've got Conte for 2 years because he never stays longer than that, and we're going to have to just throw everything at this to try and win something. Surely they have to make a decision.
Well, I think that is the biggest frustration amongst the fans. I think we've called a lot for, well, certainly last one, Spurs have called for direction. We've called for some understanding. You know, if there's an unwillingness to change, we can't continue in the situation we find ourselves in. You know, we are reaching like an impasse, I would say, between supporters and the current board. I think, again, I won't get away from some of the great things they've done, the training ground, the stadium. But as fans, fundamentally for us, we want to know what's happening on the field in terms of trophies, being competitive, being a team that, you know, ultimately can challenge for the best and try and win the best honours. There's been plenty of occasions, I would say, under the ball to have won those opportunities. So again, you look at maybe the players that have to take a huge amount of responsibility as well. You know, some of these players are about to see off their fourth manager. So again, I think for me, just to be clear, I'm not angling this all on the board. I'm angling a lot of this on the players that are again going to see off yet another manager. And I get again a lot on the on Antonio as well. I think it's been a difficult year for him. He's lost 3 close friends. He's had a major operation. He's gone through a lot, and I think he does miss home. I think what happened with losing the 3 close friends in the operation did maybe make him think about, is managing everything. You know, should I be spending more time with my family? Should I be looking maybe at coming back to Italy, managing here? I just feel maybe for Antonio that ambition of what the project of Tottenham maybe was once sold to him hasn't necessarily turned out the way it has done. I think we've heard rumours that some of the players brought in, they've been club signings, although Antonio has earmarked them and given them the approval. These not necessarily the players they want. You know, he's had to wait, 3-4 windows, 2-3 windows for an actual genuine player in Pedro Porro, actually players a right wing back. Obviously, you got Ivan Perisic in the summer. You know, again, you wonder, you know, Danjuma coming in, it's been made clear to, you know, friend of our show, Alistair Gold, that came on from Football London, that, you know, a player that ultimately wasn't probably the one in which Conte wanted, but was given as part of, you know, a joint decision. Obviously, you would have had to sign off on him. Jed Spence, another one where, again, there would have been some form of, you know, Conte persuading the player to come. But then, again, you have to be honest and say, judging the press conferences, it says a lot when Spence didn't really get any real minutes. He was then shipped out on loan, and Danjuma so far hasn't really had many opportunities in a Tottenham shirt or minutes at all. So I think we've seen what Antonio regards is a core bunch of his favourite players. We know there's this leadership group at Tottenham as well. The likes of Kane, Højbjerg, Dyer, I think Davies is in there as well, Lloris. You just have to wonder, is enough being done behind the scenes as a group, as a team, as an organisation, as a brand, as a strategy as to what they're trying to do, because they don't really know what the plan is. And again, it goes back to what I was just saying earlier, as you said as well, you've got to know what you're aiming for. You've got to know what you're trying to do. You've got to know your blueprint. Are we going to be a win-now club? Or are we going to have a project where we're going to put someone in charge and say, look, there's a 5.5-year contract on the table there, build us something like we did with Pochettino. And when it does start to go wrong at the first time of asking, don't panic, don't sack him. I won't be a hypocrite. I did feel that with Mauricio towards the end, we needed to make a change. I think the player just ultimately wasn't playing for him. It was, I think, 1 win away in 11 months. I just, again, I look at where Spurs are right now. And I think, again, looking back at my thoughts at the time, maybe, again, hindsight's a wonderful thing, that ultimately Pochettino was the one that called for the rebuild 18 months before anybody else. He saw what was coming. And Spurs never heeded the advice from Mauricio and allowed it to get to a situation where it was stale. There was players that wanted to leave, and ultimately it resulted in Mauricio losing his job because you can't change 25 players. So I think a lot is going to need to have to be decided in these next, imminent few days at Tottenham, whether they're going to hold fire, appoint Mason to the end of the season, and then look at what the options are in the summer, which I'm sure you're going to come on to and ask me, or whether they're going to look to bring somebody in right now. Because the reason why I say that is that the season ticket renewal deadline is fast approaching. And I know Spurs will want to ensure that they secure as many fans for next season as possible. And I'm not sure, given the nature of how this has gone under Antonio and how he's spoken out so publicly about the issues at Tottenham, whether a Ryan Mason appointment, and I have to say I've got a lot of respect for Ryan Mason, really like him. I think, again, wonderful man who's been through such a lot of Tottenham. I don't know if his appointment towards the end of the season appeases fans enough to think, you know what, I'm going to spend the money now on a new season ticket.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing, or quite amazing, how quickly clubs sort things out when season ticket renewals are coming in. I mean, Spurs are not the only club to do that. Many clubs do that, make sure that they're ready for that. But let's talk about Pochettino. You talked about him there and you touched on him. Obviously, the last man, he got you to the Champions League final. You know, you lost that game really in the first 2 minutes, didn't you, with the Sissoko handball? But I was at the game and I spoke about Pochettino to fans, mate, and I was talking Ricky about the fact that would you have him back? And I have to tell you, 99% of them were like, in a heartbeat. They would have Pochettino back in a heartbeat. And it's our understanding that he would be willing to speak to Spurs if that is an option for a potential return. So yourself, Pochettino back in the hot seat?
Well, I think for me, just by giving the options on the table, what I would think they're looking to do next is actually give the fans some feeling that there's an identity, there's some pride back in the football club. And I think the last man was Mauricio. I think he spoke glowingly, said there was unfinished business. I will say this because, again, it's come up a lot on last one on Spurs. I don't think everybody wants Mauricio to come back, and that's including actually the board at Tottenham. I know there's a real split there, that they're concerned that ultimately the way he left the club and how throughout his tenure, there are some splits. So Daniel Levy would need to do a lot of convincing. And ultimately what he'd be doing by bringing Mauricio back is actually making and admitting that he's made a mistake, which this board have never done in 20 years. And I think this would be a way in which they could really get back some support from the fans to say, do you know what, we've done something wrong. The board have never really admitted their mistakes. They've admitted they've taken their eye off the ball at times, don't get me wrong, but I think what Daniel needs to do to retain some faith in supporters is just say, look, do you know what, guys, at the time, obviously, with Mauricio, arguably, we should have maybe given him the rebuild that he asked for and obviously made it very clear to us, and we decided to go in a different direction. And maybe in hindsight now, that wasn't the right thing to do. I mean, it sounds mad. I think Spurs have spent, this is before Conte's compensation, of around 50 million on the respective couple of managers. Well, Conte, Nuno, Jose, since Pochettino's been here. So it's cost them 50 million to get back to where they were in the beginning in bringing Mauricio to the club. So again, you have to admit that's a massive financial mistake to have made. And then also the decisions behind it to bring him back, because you are admitting you've made a mistake. And I think that is the biggest thing at the moment that I think is the big tipping point and splitting point of bringing Mauricio back. It's someone admitting they've made a mistake to do so. And I think that's where probably the problem lies. And you look at the other options on the table, and Julian Nagelsmann that's just become available, you know, someone like that, you know, Spurs looked at, I think, back in 2021 at the time where Jose was dismissed.
Correct, yeah.
Didn't get him. He was at Leipzig. Went to Bayern, of course. You know, arguably he's very similar in the way in which he was seen as a project manager, give him a long contract. So again, that might be an interesting option for Tottenham. Obviously, you know, Thomas Tuchel's name is off the table now. I know there's been a lot of mixed reports, some stating that Spurs were in talks and he was excited about the project, others dismissing that he was even spoken to. So I think, look, I'm not sure if Thomas Tuchel would have suited Spurs anyway. I think it would have been a fifth Chelsea manager. I mean, it almost then becomes a sign where Tottenham are just copying Chelsea's trend by employing these managers. And you've got to have your own plan. You've got to have your own blueprint. So in answer to your question, I think Mauricio would be the man that many would accept for sure. But again, I can't get away from the fact not everybody would feel it's the right decision. That's important that I say that.
Yeah, I mean, Nagelsmann was liked by Daniel Levy. They went from when the end was coming for Jose Mourinho, that he was someone they sounded out. Obviously, he ended up at Bayern Munich. And then you've talked about Mason there, and he is the man to step into the role should Tottenham need someone to do so. And there's a lot of respect for Ryan Mason at the club that you spoke about, Ricky, and players respect him. And obviously fans do as well for what he's been through. It's been unbelievable that he's in the game still, which speaks volumes about the character of the man. And then Pochettino, like you said, would be there. I'll not obviously talk about other people's reporting. I don't know who their sources are. I'm not going to besmirch other people. My understanding is that Tuchel was not close to becoming the Tottenham manager. Tottenham were interested, but he wasn't close. And the likelihood of that would have been quite difficult for Tuchel because he does love Chelsea Football Club. That has to be said about Thomas Tuchel. He did love his time there and the fans and etc., etc. One thing about Pochettino, though, Ricky, is the fact that if he comes in, that could be enough to convince Harry Kane to stay at Spurs. We understand that their relationship is incredibly strong, and that actually could dictate who the board decide is the next manager, because Manchester United will push for Harry Kane this summer, we think. They don't want to get dragged into an Osimhen battle because that will be around 130 million euros for him. Man City want him, Chelsea want him, PSG want him, and Man United aren't keen because they need to strengthen in other areas. And Harry Kane's there. Does Pochettino keep Kane? Would you take Pochettino to keep Kane? Or are you ready to let Harry Kane move on?
I think, taking my football hat off, and just on a personal level, Harry Kane, who, as we record this from last night, broke the record to become England's greatest ever goal scorer, I will feel gutted for him on a personal level if he does not go on and win trophies. I'll be devastated for him for what he's given to the sport, for what he's given to the game, what he's given to Tottenham. I think it'll be a real shame of a player of his calibre would not, although from all the personal accolades, be remembered for winning a Premier League or a Champions League or even an FA Cup or a League Cup. It's really sad. Obviously, the power now is shifting towards Harry in terms of what he wants to do with his future because of the nature of the contract. And if I was Harry, I've got to be honest and say this, that I'm a Spurs fan. I love the football club, hence why we do Last Word on Spurs. If I was Harry, I probably would look at my options and really assess what's out there for me. But to answer your question, I think Mauricio coming back to the football club probably does raise the percentage chance of Harry signing a new contract at Tottenham. But I still think Harry would want some massive reassurances that for even Mauricio coming back, what does that mean different from Mauricio this time around? Are we going to sack Mauricio under the first bout of pressure? Are we going to give him 4 or 5 years to actually try and bring that identity culture back to Tottenham, where we were competing for the Premier League in a Champions League final, getting to the latter stages of the FA Cup, got to a League Cup final? Because I think Harry would probably say his most, I would say, pleasurable and enjoyable time at Tottenham, although he's learnt a lot of Conte and Jose from a personal level in terms of his ability in the game. I think he would probably say Mauricio was his most favourite time at the club because of what Harry did under his tenure and what he got to in terms of finals, although we didn't get over the line. That would maybe give him the belief that Spurs can maybe get back there. But again, a lot has to change in the club. I said to you earlier, Fraser, that they've got 7 or 8 players that are still there from who they were before under Mauricio. And again, that's the biggest problem with Tottenham. There's not been enough of a refresh of the squad, enough of a changeover. You're looking at who's still there now? Davinson Sanchez, Lucas Moura, Harry Kane, Heung-min Son, Eric Dyer, Ben Davis. Luke. It's insane really when you think about that. So, as I've said, I think Spurs need to just make their mind up on what they want to be. When you've made your mind up on what you want to be, you then have to decide how you go about it. They've got to have a plan. I think that's the one thing that Tottenham we've not seen really is a real sense of a plan, real sense of direction and how they want to move forward. And I think that's what fans like myself are genuinely calling for. Yes, we're calling for change. We are calling for something to fundamentally change at board level. Because ultimately, whilst they've done some great things, I keep on saying off the pitch, ultimately on it, we've not been good enough. And nobody on that board can come out and justify what has happened on pitch has been good enough for this football club. There's nobody that can do. Yes, they've taken the club from when they came in from, mid-table to top 4 or 5, and we've been competing against teams that are, got some of the state ownership behind them in terms of money that they've been given to fund. But ultimately, the way
to say you're even competing with them, though, because you are, with the greatest respect, you're going for the 4th spot. You're not near City. You're not near Arsenal at this point. You're not near Liverpool.
No, I hear what you're saying, Fraser, but I think the argument would be that when Mauricio was here, there was still City around, there was still United around, there was still Liverpool around that were getting a lot of money coming in, and Spurs were in title races. Spurs were in cup finals. And I think that is the frustration that we've actually, since we've appointed the 2 win now managers, we are further away now than what we were under Mauricio. So again, I think we've not got past the 5th round of the FA Cup since Mauricio left the football club. I don't want to make this all about Pochettino. I don't want to make it all about Mauricio. But all I'm saying is that you had a manager that was here for a long period of time that got Spurs competing with very limited resources compared to what arguably Jose and Conte have been given. And he's still got more out of the players. So I think, again, this is what I mean. You need to have a plan. You need to know where you're going. Again, I'm not making it all about Poch. It's not a push for Poch show, I promise you. I just want to see someone that comes in that can bring back the identity to Tottenham. If that's Nagelsmann, whether that's Ruben Amorim, whether, some of the Thomas Frank's been mentioned, whoever that may be, they need to be given a plan. And I've got to say this as fans, we're going to have to stick by that manager, within reason. If it's Nuno Espirito Santo, then fans have got every right, as I never tell the fans what to do. I've got no right to. Those fans are incredible. They go home and away. They oversing the home fans at many grounds. We've got the best fans in the world, in my opinion. We've got the best supporters in the world that travel home and away. They're the most patient set of fan bases, with managers, with players, you name it. We've stood by so many players at Tottenham. The Adebayors, the Saldados. When I look at some of the players, even the Gareth Bales at the start, I mean, didn't have the greatest start at Tottenham. We stood by a lot of the players, and Spurs fans I think we're a certain type of breed that we are very patient fans. You won't get many patient fans like Tottenham that have, waited 20 years for success. Look what Arsenal did a few seasons ago by protesting. Spurs fans just, I'm not speaking for everybody here, they obviously feel a different way going about things. And maybe, again, I'm people, it's a free country. They've got every right to what they want to do. If they want to protest, they're more than welcome to protest. But ultimately, something has to change. It has to change. It needs to change. And it needs to change fast, because we've actually got a very good crop of players as a whole. Yes, there's 4, 5 or 6 that still need to go. And again, I don't want to be personal and start name-checking people, but I think they know who they are. They've been here for 8, 9 years, where ultimately, as Spurs as a club want to push on, are those players to do that. The likes of the Romeros, the Pedro Porros, the Rodrigo Bentancurs, the Kulusevskis. We've got a really good set of players. Some of those, but Richarlison there, I know he's not had a great first season, but he'll come back, he'll come again. He's shown for Brazil he's a world-class player. He won the Puskas Award, or should have won the Puskas Award. I mean, this is what I mean. I honestly think with Tottenham that there's some real good players there. But as I've said, you've got to get the right man in. And ultimately, I'm sitting there saying that Mauricio got a lot out of players. And I'm just going to say, if it was him, I'd be behind him the same way I'd be behind any man. But what Spurs can't do is come out and say they're looking at, having a manager that plays free-flowing, attacking football, and then appoint Nuno. You just can't do that. You just can't do that. You really, really can't. So it's, like I say, back to having a plan and sticking by your beliefs.
Well, on that correct appointment, the Ruben Amorim line was our line. That was our exclusive, that Amorim would be keen. He's interested in the Premier League. Spurs would be an option for him if they want to go down that route. Yep, some would say unproven, but certainly showing his mettle at Sporting Lisbon. I'm sure you enjoyed watching them put Arsenal out, Ricky. And then obviously you've got Pochettino, we've got Nagelsmann in the mix there. So the next appointment's important, and whoever that is going to have a big summer ahead of them, because you've got players that you're talking about who are coming to the end of contract, players that you're talking about who are maybe aging now or coming to the end of their careers, have been there for a long time, and a refresh is needed. We know that Dean Henderson at Manchester United, who has been on loan at Nottingham Forest, is of interest. Lloris obviously has been there for a long time. They wanted Pickford. He signed a new deal with Everton, so that could be an area of change. You're in charge of the summer, Ricky. You're giving Daniel Levy says, right, Ricky, here you go. What do you want? What, in realistic terms, do you think Spurs need to go and do?
Do you know what's hard about answering that question, Fraser? What's really hard about answering that is, what kind of manager is going to be coming in. Is it a manager that favours a back three? Is it a manager that favours a back four? I'm going to ask you that question just in terms of when I look at the squad and what I think we need to do. The goalkeeping situation needs to be addressed. I mean, it's no surprise, as we said, Hugo is probably likely, I would think, maybe to leave the club in the summer. We've got the year left, but I think Spurs, as Hugo actually said himself, he's trying to help plan for the successor. Whether he remains for that final season, I'm not too sure, because he's obviously got a 2-year contract, or whether, like I say, Spurs are now looking at the targets you mentioned there, Dean Henderson, Jordan Pickford. That needs to be addressed this summer. That's number one. I look at the defence. Clement Longley's just not impressed me. I've got to be honest with you. I think he's very similar to Ben Davies. I'm not putting down Ben Davies by saying that, but hasn't been, I think, what we envisaged. We know that Spurs wanted Alessandro Bastoni. He didn't want to leave the club. There's nothing you can do about that, but I'd love to know how high up on the list Clement Longley actually was to, being near Bastoni. I know they had interest in Gvardio as well. There's been a number of players mentioned. Obviously, Paulo Torres is another one there as well. So that's, again, an area where Clement Longley will leave. They need to bring somebody in. There might be an argument supposed to bring another centre-back in on top of that, because Eric Dyer's form has been really, really, really shaky. It's been really, really shaky for a long time. There was a period where he settled down and he was finally getting that consistency under Antonio, but unfortunately he's reverted to type. And I think there's a mistake in Eric. And I think, again, really lovely guy. I think he's a leader of that dressing room. But ultimately, for Spurs to be successful, you've got to make big ruthless decisions. And that's another one where I think Spurs need to make a ruthless decision. Bizarrely, I think Spurs at fullback now seem to be okay. You know, again, you'd argue if a manager wants to play a back three, what's their options? They're going to play a back four. What's their options? They've got Destiny Adugi coming to the club in the summer. They've always obviously got as well Perisic, probably, I would imagine. Obviously, with Antonio going, and he was obviously an Antonio signing, I'm not sure about Perisic will be here in the summer. So they have got Ryan Sessegnon, to be fair, for me, is flattered to deceive. I think, yeah, I mean, Antonio seems to really like Ryan. He's given him so many ample opportunities, but for me, hasn't impressed enough. So it's whether a new manager comes in and thinks they've got three there now. Once Adugi arrives, in Adugi, Sessegnon, Perisic, what do you want to do? So that side is fairly well stocked for now, depending on what the manager wants to do when he comes in. On the right-hand side, again, you maybe argue overloaded at the moment. You know, you've also got to bear in mind there's loan players to come back. Reguilon's got to come back. That's another fourth player that's there. So the situation at the moment on the right-hand side is you've got Pedro Porro, Emerson Royale, and yeah, and then again with Tottenham, what does the future hold on that right-hand side? It remains to be seen. It really, really does. You know, I think with Tottenham, Emerson is probably a player that we suited better to a back four, but they've just bought Pedro Porro, and you've got Jed Spence coming back as well. So you've got three on that position. So you've got six in total on both sides where only two can play. So again, that's a big thing for the manager to make. So I think they're well stocked. Midfield, I've been saying it. God, banging the drums.
Spurs need a creative
have to have a number 10. Need to have a number 10. A Maddison a la type player that's going to run that midfield. I mean, yeah, it's. I know, again, Anthony Gordon was mentioned. I think that I never really saw enough of Gordon to tell me he was ready right now. Newcastle have bought him, I think, on the word potential. They've been able to do that because of the finances they've got. And maybe, again, Eddie Howe sees something. Maybe Eddie Howe does see something in him as well.
He's been all over the place, Eddie Howe, in the last few days.
To be fair. He's got enough on his plate, to be fair, as Joshua, so I won't bring him into this. But Eddie Howe, to be fair to him, sees probably a lot in regards to Gordon, which is why he signed him. And finally, I think from my perspective, from a Spurs perspective, I think I just need to make sure I make their mind up what they want to do.
Yeah, I think also Harry Kane's situation will dictate a lot of the market because you might be replacing him and need a striker, which could be interesting. It would be interesting to see if Harry Kane moving actually inspires Spurs to rebuild something new as well because of the major role he plays at the club. So that's a huge one to watch. When I went and watched you against AC Milan, you were crying out for someone in the middle of the park to actually make some passes and actually create something as well. Pedro Porro, I think, is a very, very good signing for Tottenham Hotspur. Centre-back will be addressed. Bastoni was a fan. Conte was a fan of Bastoni at Inter Milan, but they do want a lot of money for him. And you've spoke about the goalkeeper position as well, Ricky, which will be addressed too. So it was a huge, huge summer for you. I'm going to let you go in a minute, mate, and thank you for your time coming on as well. Like I said, if you want to catch Ricky Last Word on Spurs, is all down in the description below. You can catch all his details there as well. As you can see it behind his head there, all the information's there. So you can catch his details there. But in a word, Ricky, top four, are you finishing in the top four this season?
I'll say to you on top four, it depends who comes in. Depends who comes in, ultimately. That's what I think. It depends who comes in. I wouldn't want to put a call on that for now. I think we've got to see who comes in and go from there, really. I think that's ultimately what we need to see what happens with Tottenham.
Yeah, we'll find out more next week, most likely about Antonio Conte. Just to reiterate, he's currently, the club are trying to work out how much they would need to pay and what his situation is going to be. Spurs are still very much in the top four race. I think that needs to be made clear as well. And then it's a big season. Will Harry Kane leave? What's going to happen in the goalkeeper position? And I'm sure we'll get Ricky back on to talk about things again. And I'll thank you for your time, Ricky. And I'll let you go, mate, because I know you've got a busy day. So thanks very much, mate.
Top man. Thank you so much. And looking forward to obviously coming back on and joining you guys really soon.